So let's take a look at chapter 19. This chapter has two main sections. The first longer section tells you all about the verbs that end in me, like Amy, but a whole bunch of other ones. And then the second section, which is short at the end, goes over the verbs that have an alpha or an omicron in the stem. So a-o and o-o verbs. I'll deal with those separately in a different video. In this video, I just want to go over the me verbs. Now, I don't want to go into a lot of detail about these. I just basically want to give you the forms and have you either type them out or write them out once to sort of get them in your memory. And then we'll move on. And it might be something you want to come back to in the next month or two and spend some time learning them in more detail. But we're not going to spend a lot of time on them in this class. I do want to mention a few things from the chapter, though. If you look on the first page of the chapter, page 214, you see that there are three verbs there that Duff uses as models. There's tithemi, didomi, and histemi. Now, tithemi occurs 100 times in the New Testament, and histemi occurs 155 times. But didomi shows up 415 times. So we're going to look at didomi as our just one model verb, but I do encourage you to come back again and look at tithemi and histemi because they occur enough that you should probably know about them. A couple other things in the chapter that I want to mention. On page 217, where Duff discusses the meaning of histemi, he talks about the way histemi, meaning to stand, can either mean I stand, as in I stand the lamp on my desk. I cause it to stand. I put it there and make it stand up. That's the transitive form because it's going to have a direct object. I stand the lamp. Or it can also mean I stand as in I stand up, I stand myself. Now, normally we've seen that Greek would make those distinctions with voice. It would be the active voice when I stand the lamp on my desk, and it would be the middle voice when I stand up. But for some reason, histemi doesn't work that way. It can be transitive or intransitive, even using the active voice. So take a look at what Duff has to say about that. But to be honest, most of the time you'll be able to tell which meaning the author is using by the context and by whether or not there's a direct object. The other thing to look at is on the next page, well, 2 pages later, 219, under other syllable similar verbs. Let's just look at a few of those. We have hiemi, which is means to send, but it doesn't occur unless it has a prefix. So we have afiemi, I leave, forgive, and dismiss. And that one shows up pretty often. We have suniemi, that means I understand. Then we have verbs in umi, like deknumi, I show, and apolumi, I destroy. That one in particular shows up a lot. And rugnumi, I break. Femi only has a few forms that show up, but it does show up regularly, so be sure and look at those forms. And then Amy, you already know, it's not going to have all the forms like we see with didomi, rather, but you have already learned the forms of Amy. So let's take a look at all the forms of didomi. So the unusual thing about didomi and other verbs like it is it has this reduplication in the present tense. We've seen reduplication in the perfect, but here we have this verb where we have delta iota, delta omega. And what we'll see is that what's going on here is the stem is actually delta omicron. But in this form, first person singular, present active, indicative, we have the reduplication of the delta with a iota vowel, whereas with the perfect, we saw reduplication with an epsilon vowel. And we also have a lengthening of the vowel so that omicron becomes omega. So let's take a look at what this looks like in the present tense. So we get first person singular didomi, didos, didosin, and then when we get to the plural, the vowel stops lengthening. So we get didomen, didote, and didoasin. In the middle passive, and notice the alpha there, that's a little bit different. In the middle passive, we get didomai, so the vowel doesn't lengthen here, but the endings are what you might expect. Didomai, didosai, didotai, didomitha, didoste, didontai. And so at this point, you might want to pause the video, but make sure and take your time and type these all into your spreadsheet, your form, or else write them on your notebook or whatever paper you're using, just to have written them out once, to have looked at how they work letter by letter. The imperfect uses this same oddly reduplicated stem, but we also get the epsilon augment for the past tense, and we get the secondary endings. So we get edidun, edidus, edidu, edidomen, edidote, edidun. And then in the middle passive for the imperfect, we get a second, there are two different forms for third person plural. We can get edidun or edidosan. Either of those show up. Middle passive, we get edidomain, edidoso, edidoto, edidomitha, edidoste, edidonto. And that's the imperfect for didomai. Now, when we get to the aorist, we no longer have this reduplication at the front. So the D, the delta iota, drops off, and we just get the stem, do. The other odd thing about these me verbs is that they form the aorist in a couple of different ways, and some of them, like didomi, use the kappa instead of the sigma. So you look at the kappa and you might be wondering, well, how are we going to tell the difference between the aorist and the perfect? Because the perfect is going to use the kappa. Well, didomi is going to have the regular perfect tense reduplication, and we'll see that in a few minutes. And that's going to help us tell the difference between the aorist and the perfect. So here again, we have the aorist. The delta iota reduplication from the present tense is gone, and we just have the stem of the verb, do, with the epsilon augment. The omega has lengthened, the omicron has lengthened to an omega. We have a kappa instead of a sigma, and we still have the alpha. So we get edoka, edokas, edoken, edokamen, edokate, edokan. In the middle, we get the secondary middle endings. So edomain, edu, edoto, edometha, edoste, edonto. And then for the passive, we get the theta eta, just like we did with luo. Edothane, edothes, edothe, edothemen, edothete, edothesan. Now here comes the perfect. With the perfect, we get this reduplication like we normally do with the perfect. We get the kappa like we always do. We have dedo instead of dido. In the present, we get dido, but here we get dedo, and the omicron becomes an omega because it lengthens in front of the kappa. So we get dedoka, dedokas, dedoken, dedokamen, dedokate, dedokan. And then in the middle passive, we get dedomai, dedosai, dedotai, dedomitha, dedoste, dedontai. And remember to just pause it and catch up if you need a few more minutes. Now, the one tense we haven't done yet is the future. So let's go back and pick that up. We get do, so, do, seis, do, say. So notice here we don't have the present stem. We're just using, we don't get the dido, we just get the do from the aorist. The future uses the verbal stem, which is the stem that the aorist uses. Dos somen, do sete, and do susin. In the middle, we get do somai, do se, do sitai, do sometha, do seste, do sontai. And in the passive, as usual, we get those long endings. We get do the somai, but notice that the stem of the verb is just those first two letters, delta omicron. Do the se, do the sitai, do the sometha, do the seste, and do the sontai. So that's it for all the indicative tenses. So now let's take a look at the infinitive. The active infinitive is in the present is going to use the present stem, which has that reduplication with the iota, didonai. And in the middle passive, it'll be didostai. But then in the aorist, we go back to just the stem of the verb, dunai, dosthai, and dothenai. Moving on to the subjunctive, we get the lengthened vowel that's indicative of the subjunctive, that indicates the subjunctive, might be a better way to say it. And in the present, we get the reduplication with the iota. So dido, didos, dido. Notice the difference between first singular and third singular. We have the subscript iota in third singular. Didomen, didote, and didosin. Then in the middle passive, we get didomai, didos, didotai, didometha, didoste, and didontai. And now moving to the aorist, we're going to lose that funny reduplication that these have in the present tense. So we'll just get in the active do, dos, do, domen, do te, and do sin. So notice that the aorist active is exactly the same as the present active in the subjunctive, just without this reduplication. In the middle, we get do mai, do, do tai, do metha, do ste, and don tai. And in the passive, we get do tho, do thes, do the. And then I couldn't find anywhere what the first and second plural forms of the aorist passive for didomi are. So we're going to jump down to the third plural and get do, dothosin. So again, pause for a minute and fill all of those in. Now let's move on to the imperative. Again, the present tense has the dido stem. So we get didu and didote. Now I have these in a different order than Duff has them. I have the second singular and second plural together and the third singular and third plural together. That's because in English we translate the second person similarly. We say give. And even in the second plural, we still say give because English doesn't distinguish between second person singular and plural. Whereas in third person, we have let him give or let them give. And so that's why I have them organized the way I do. But if you prefer to set up your table differently, you can do that as well. So third singular, present active imperative is didoto. And then third plural is didoasin. Middle passive, we get dido, didoste, and then didosto, and didostosan. Now again, when we move to the aorist, this reduplication with the iota drops off. So we get dos, dote, doto, and dotosan. And then for the middle, we get du and doste, dosto. And again, I couldn't find the third plural here. So we just let's go to the passives. We get dotheti. And again, that's it. So those are rare anyway. Don't worry about not having them. If you happen to find it at some point and want to send it to me, that would be great so I can fill out my table for the next class. But honestly, you're not going to use those sort of obscure forms very much anyway. If you've filled all of that out, go ahead and we'll keep going and let's look at the participle. The active present participle is didus in the masculine, didun in the neuter, and didusa in the feminine. I have the masculine and the neuter together here because they're going to end up being the same in some cases. So in the masculine genitive singular, we get diduntus, in the neuter as well. And then the feminine is going to be diduses. And the masculine neuter dative plural is didusin. The middle passive forms are easier to decline. So we get didominus, and the endings are going to change just like logos. Didominun, and I forget your second declension model noun, but whatever neuter noun for the second declension, the endings are going to change just like that. And then feminine, didomene, it's going to have endings just like first declension. Genitive singular, we get, oh, nope. I didn't bother to put those again because it's going to be just like the first and second declension nouns that you've already learned. Aorist is going to then drop off this funny reduplication. So we just get dus, done, and dusa. Again, notice it is exactly like the active forms. So then we get duntus, and duses, and then dusin. For the middle forms, we get dominus, dominun, and domine, again, just like the middle passive present, but without the present reduplication. And the passive forms then, I did fill these in, dominu, dominu, domines. Obviously in here, you would get didominu, didominu, didomines. So then the passive, you're going to get dothes, dothen, and dothesa. In the genitive, you'll get dothentos, dothentos, and dotheses. And then for the masculine neuter dative plural, which can be sometimes irregular, you'll get dothesin. So that is it for the me verbs. Hopefully you got a chance to write all of them out. Now you've seen them, you've sort of felt them, you've looked at them letter by letter, and you've seen the ways that they are similar and different from Luo. You can compare the two charts if you want to look at that more in detail. If you want to memorize that in the future, like I say, there's not that many differences, especially with the endings. The funny thing is that reduplication that happens in the middle. And then of course, that's going to affect what happens to some of the vowels in some of the endings. But most of the patterns are going to be very similar to Luo. That's all I have for you on this. So just let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.